Coming up on That's a Great Point.
I think when practicing creating safe space in everyday life, it's transformative. It changes how much of a person we get to know. It changes in the working world. It completely transforms a relationship where you can actually find solutions that you wouldn't have possibly been able to find if those defenses were up and people weren't contracted. So when you create that space, you're creating trust, you're creating room for curiosity, for openness. I think with children at home as parents, you create a connection where that's a deepened relationship with family, with loved ones.
Hello, everyone. On today's episode of That's a Great Point, we have special guest Tanya Smart, my darling wife. We're talking about creating a safe space, and Tanya's really good at that, being a school counselor. What happens whenever we create a safe space for others? Well, it gives them opportunity to be seen, heard, and understood. Three of the most valuable things we can offer to another human being. We create a deeper level of trust between each other. And whenever the safe space is created, it opens the opportunity for better creativity and critical thinking skills, very important in the workplace. So, today's episode was recorded very early on in our recording. You'll notice the cadence is a little bit different than some of our other episodes. The first 15 minutes or so are some of our regular playful banter that you get used to in some of the other episodes. The last 15 minutes or so is some of our playful banter. The middle section is a little bit slower than normal. It's highly educational. I really do hope you enjoy, and I hope you could take away some awesome points from this that can help you deepen your most meaningful relationships in your life. Thank you so much for playing along. Enjoy. Welcome to That's a Great Point, the attitude adjustment for your soul, where co-hosts Alina Doran, Michelle Albers, and Lee Smart discuss deep topics around a life well lived. Let's start the show. Okay,
Ooh.
you're on the spot now. Everybody put on their best face.
Who's on the spot? All of us?
All of us.
Everyone.
Everyone.
See, best face.
Put on your best face.
Because I don't know. I'm gonna try again. I'll perfect it. Iterate.
I thought it'd be more something like,
Ooh. Ooh. Listen, I'm glad you had a good weekend.
I gotta turn some shit off. My computer's making noise I don't like.
Oh, I'll tell you how I'm feeling. Let's talk about feelings.
Mm.
I'm excited to be with you. I am nervous about sending my daughter off to sleepaway camp, and I've been excited for her all this time, but now that we're like just a few days away, we drive her on Sunday. I am getting really nervous because she's never been away like this, and it's 2 weeks of no contact. Like she can write us letters, we can write her letters. I could send her emails through a special account. They print them and bring them to her, but there's no, I can't speak to her. I can't see her face. She'll be sleeping in a tent, and she's a city girl. She lives in an apartment building. So, it's a tent for 2 weeks.
so I feel like it's necessary to mention that Sleepaway Camp is the name of a slasher flick.
That is so very, very unhelpful. I don't know. I don't know how much. Yeah, thank you.
Well,
for
I
that.
mean, I'm pretty sure as long as she stays a virgin, she'll be completely safe.
Oh gosh. You're a horrible human.
Like, I'll give you camera face. I don't know. Like break our hearts sometimes, but break our hearts open too. And they're incredible teachers. They're so humbling.
Mm-hmm.
They're like mirrors, but not exactly, because they'll reflect all the shit.
They do break our hearts. And I think every one of our kids, there's something that I've learned from.
They're my greatest teachers.
Well, they do a fantastic job of letting you see all the things that you hate about yourself. That's for
Oh,
sure.
yes. Oh, yeah, of course. It's like that one thing that I said that I wish I didn't say, that gets like repeated and remembered. Right. And I'll always say, like, that's what you remember. That's what sticks out. Like, I said it. I shouldn't have said it. It was a mistake. I've corrected the behavior. Why are you not looking at 75,000 other things that I do well? Why do you have to look at that one thing? Like, that's
Or
the bias, right?
like my obstinate daughter, and just want to scream at her, would you quit acting like me? Damn it.
Yeah. Yes.
It's true.
It's
The obstinate
incredible.
daughter, I want to say, would you quit acting like your daddy?
Kids are like the laser pointed focus of what needs to be healed within us.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Greatest teachers I've ever
Mhm.
had are my kids.
Yeah.
Never had better teachers. It's like, it's just, yeah, it points a flashlight straight at the heart of the heart. Like, oh, shit.
It's the greatest thing for me was I finally I stopped living for me. It quit being all selfish all the time whenever my first daughter was born. And that was one of the most significant differences I ever made in my own life. Um, there's like zero doubt in my mind that if my oldest daughter hadn't been born, Tanya and I would have never gotten together because I was a miserable shit. Uh, I was just an absolute miserable shit. A lot of pain, a lot of anger, all those things that came with my childhood that I brought with me into early adulthood that I was just angry and lashed out at the world and was just an absolute selfish piece of shit. And the my dad told me in the hospital when my first daughter was born that, boy, it's about time you make yourself into something she could be proud of.
Mm.
And that phrase, that statement bowled me over more than anything else, I think. Certainly up to that point. It's like, that ain't no joke. So, and here we are.
Look at this. That is something that we all share, right? We've all been opened, stretched, pulled, surfaced, resurfaced by children. That's the four of us have that in common. Humbled.
Humbled for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
our topic that we had mentioned last week was creating a safe space. And that's one of the main reasons that Tanya's joining in today, because being a counselor, that's what she has to do very, very often for teenagers of of all things. So,
Yeah.
which is an unbelievably difficult thing to do in itself. Um, and it's also necessary for any kind of fruitful relationship too, just to have that safe space that somebody can come in and be themselves without worry of, whatever ridicule or judgment or, um, whatever it is, or pontification. Uh,
Mm.
so
Yeah.
creating a safe space and go.
Me?
Whoever wants to go.
Well, if it's okay, I guess I'll go. So whenever we were in our Friday call and Alina, I think it was, challenged me to do the 15 minutes of writing. And I said, done. The very first thing, nonfiction writing to be specific, the very first thing that popped into my head was creating a safe space. My thought was to maybe try and put out some nonfiction writing through Substack that could be kind of geared towards school counselors primarily, but that could maybe also be useful for, other people in helping professions and parents, yada, 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 yada. And then for some reason, creating a safe space was just top of mind. And I started writing. Yeah, I got a lot down. I still need some editing and whatnot, but I kind of started thinking, what does a safe space look like? Like, it's more than just a physical space. Now the physical space is immensely important, but to me, a safe space is both creating a place where somebody can look around and what they see is comforting, but also your persona, the person, how you act, your tone, your nature, that in and of itself is going to create a safe space for anyone, children, teenagers, other adults that you're trying to have a conversation with. And that's kind of what I just word vomited in my article.
And when, yeah, I mean, you're talking about creating a safe space for teenagers or going through so much change in their lives, in addition to whatever's happening in their specific situation that might make their lives more difficult. And that's when I think about what are some of the tenets of creating a safe space, and how do you know that you're succeeding, right? How do you know that it's working?
I think body language is a big indicator, right? Like, I did try to think, how do you create a space in a safe space in a virtual environment, which is sort of what led to a little bit more of the, okay, it's not just a physical space, but it's also, and I did not get very far into that. I didn't include the virtual because I don't do a lot of virtual work. I did some in COVID, but most of it is physically in my office. So that's kind of where the article goes. I would put myself out there if y'all would like to read it. I don't think I can share it on my laptop because I had to log into my work laptop, and it's a pain in the butt to get signed into my personal Google. Erin, do you think you can, the document shared with you, do you think you can maybe throw
we'll
it?
get to it in a little bit.
Yeah.
So, there's a few things popping up for me as you're talking. There's a few like concrete things to think about whenever we're talking about creating a safe space, and that's I mean, obviously number one is going to be what kind of mood are you in? Because if you're coming in highly anxious and or depressed or distracted, all these things will play a big part in how the space is created.
The
Right?
helper, you mean?
Yeah, for the person responsible for the space, right? Be it a leader, manager, counselor, coach, whatever.
What pops up for me, and I say this to almost everyone that I work with, my clients, is all the mask, the shield, the sword that you carry all day, just we're going to hang it up at the door, and you're going to walk in, and you're going to be your squishy self, like pimps, wrinkles, warts, and all. This is a place to rest and see what's here. And how do we do that on our end? When I think about that, is of course active listening, that it needs to be clear what we're doing needs to communicate to the other person that we really give a shit.
Absolutely.
And we're really listening. We're not listening in a way that we're waiting for someone to finish speaking so that we can say what we were going to say to begin with. but we are actually here in this moment, every moment with them, with that person speaking. And that is going to be shown through, I mean, literally listening. So a lot of this, and the body language, right? Sometimes it looks like mirroring. Sometimes it looks like nodding. Sometimes it looks like tearing up. I don't know. Sometimes it's just sitting in silence and giving the space. But if there's a sincerity that needs to be there and it needs to translate to the other person, that I think that's one is sincerity, two, active listening, which is, like, if you don't have sincerity and active listening, then it's like, don't even be there. Don't have it. You can't have a safe space. I think being in the moment with the person is really important. When I think about that as the intro for, you could say we're going to hang up our mask and shield and sword, but how do you show them this is really a different place?
Look like you had something there, Michelle.
This is my jam. I like everything that you guys are saying, what's coming in addition to those things. I guess it's layered within all the things you're saying, but is like the energy of the space, kind of like you said, like what kind of mood are you in? That matters. If the space doesn't feel like, I think there's boundaries within a safe space. So if it doesn't feel protected or private, like that can be like that. I learned that over COVID with the virtual. I did a lot of free virtual meditations and classes just because I like the energy was so heavy in the world, and to figure out how to navigate a safe space on a camera where nobody's used to mics, nobody's used to cameras, nobody wants to actually speak up. You almost have to create clarity of like what this can look like should they choose to show up in that way, but also let them know that they get to show up however they choose to, so that they get to make that choice. I think sometimes we feel like stuck in a, like we have to show up a certain kind of way because this is what's expected of us in the real world. And so I think clarity on that, I think boundaries, and I think the last piece, which you've all touched on, is you just got to get yourself out of the way so that you can see who's in the room. And if you're always in yourself, you can't see who's in the room. So it's like how you're showing up with your own boundaries, in your own energy, with an underlying energy of confidence and compassion, I think. Because if you don't feel confident, they feel that, and then they don't trust you to unpack, so to speak, right? And then compassionate if they feel there's an ounce of judgment or a conditioned response that they're expecting because of how their world is. I don't know. I think it's a really cool thing to think about, because even within my own studio, there's 3 different rooms and they all feel different, and they're all different containers as far as how I navigate expectations that they might have, so that I can put their mind at ease, so there's not the fear, because they're doing something they're not used to, right? If they've already done it a million times, then they already know how the space feels, and it's clearly safe for them because they come back. But if they've never engaged with people in this way before, and then suddenly they're in a room full of people ready to get vulnerable, that feels vulnerable without some sort of a clarity piece first.
I could tell you, I know what not to do.
What's that?
Yeah, it's some of my learnings and growings is for years I would always have a story that would play in my head as people were talking. Right. Whatever it was, like something they would say would remind me of something, and I would keep that and I would hang on to it, and I would just make sure that some point I'm going to tell you this story because it's so important to me. Right. Let me tell you about this lesson I learned. Let me tell you about what happened to me, all that, because it felt like I was trying to relate to this other person. It's like, hey, your story really reminded me of something that was important for me. It's like thinking that's a way of relating. And come to find out, all I was doing is interjecting myself in a way that was disruptive to allowing the other person to open up and be themselves and say what needs to be said. So, whenever you start to say, to get yourself out of the way, I'm trying to think, okay, how does that apply into real life? How does that because sometimes I find that these upper level concepts are difficult to apply unless we start to give them real life stories. And that's a real life story for me. It's telling those stories or having those lessons. Let me tell you about this book that I was reading that just really reminded me what you said or whatever it is. So it's getting on my high horse and pontificating or whatever. Um, so that's been very difficult for me to allow that to go because that's so important to me, that learning, that knowledge, that those stories. And I want to tell my stories. So, and then I realized after, years of trying to relate to people that those stories were getting in the way of me relating to people. So now I've changed my thought process to let's dive a little bit deeper. What do you tell me about? What does that mean to you? What's important to you about what you're telling me? And that has really, really opened up a whole new level of deeper communication and deeper relations with people that I didn't know that was available because it's not that surface level. Let's just trade stories back and forth. It's kind of like CTI talks about level one, level two, level three listening. Level one is you're always in your own head trying to relate everything they're saying to somebody else's story. And level two is you're actually over there with them and you're listening to what they're saying and you're getting in on their side. And that level three is being very aware of everything else as well. The mood behind what they're saying, there's the slight changes in inflection, how the environment seems to play into whatever they're saying, those various things. Um, so really, really getting in and sensing the tone, watching the body language. I remember one time I was having a coaching conversation with a client that his words and his body language didn't match up. And I called it out. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was a couple of years now, but it was like he was saying something happy, but it was like really subdued, sunk in on himself. I said, you made that sound like that was a really exciting moment, but I'm noticing that you don't look excited. What's up with that? And that opened up a whole new level of, yeah, I'm feeling guilty about I really should like this more, and I know I should, so I speak to it. Uh, but I'm just feeling guilty about it because I'm not actually excited about this thing going on in my life, whatever it was. I don't remember now. Wouldn't even matter. Confidentiality, right? But that's kind of what we're talking about is creating that safe space for people to open up, just being curious about them, getting on their side. What's coming up?
I love that. That level 1, 2, 3 listening, right? The level 3 that you're talking about, like global, what's not being said is so very important. It's at least half the equation, probably more than half of the equation than what's actually being verbalized. And when I can totally relate to what you're saying, I used to think that I am being helpful to a person, right? With my friends years ago, if I tell them a story that look, I relate to you. See, I get what you're saying. I've been there. Oh, that's really difficult. And it took time, right? Time training to realize, oh, that sounds like I'm one-upping them sometimes. Like you've had it bad. Let me tell you, I've had it even worse. So which the subtext there is like, what do you even have to complain about? Which totally minimizes, boxes them in, closes them up, right? They contract. It's the opposite of what we're looking to do.
Yeah.
So took me some time to internalize those learnings.
Yeah. You gotta love those the trauma competitions that come in the self-help space.
Oh, that is a whole other offshoot we might want to come back to. That's just comedy. Kind of want to do a sketch now. I kind of want to take a 5-minute sketch where the four of us try to outdo one up each other and see what happens.
That sounds like fun.
But I think that's one is that, right, of the storytelling, when that happens, you're just not listening and you're making it about yourself. So the person who's supposed to be creating the safe space is now closing in on the other person, boxing them in, and now they're getting what they're getting in the rest of the world. They're not able to actually open up and reflect. One of the other things that I had to let go of along the lines of what you're talking about is a fixer mindset of the intention is I see that you're in pain. You're coming to me, something's challenging for you. And I have all these ideas. So I'm just going to start shooting them out at you, right? Like ping pong, right? And well, tell me, what do you think about this? And for many years in my professional life, my job was to come in, assess the problem, and start coming out with solutions. Fix, fix, fix. I was a fixer, right? In my family, I was a fixer. In my friends' lives, like I was the fixer. That's not the space. That's not the mindset that is helpful in creating a safe space. Because when we're a fixer, we're preempting the person. We're making all sorts of assumptions, which completely undermines the whole active listening component.
And
right?
it's
We're
still
not
about the
hearing,
fixer at that point, right? It's
right?
it's still about the fixers. That
It's
fixers
about the
themselves
person. That's
Yeah.
right. It's about the person. You're trying to make ourselves better. So we're not hearing what the person's saying. And then there's definitely no room for what's not being said. None of that is being seen. So again, it's this creating when I think about what not to do, those things that we're all talking about, they close the space in and make it smaller and create contraction, which is the opposite of what is helpful.
It's very difficult to be a good coach, a good counselor, a good therapist, a great parent whenever we are the fixer, because that fixer in us, that's our sense of self-importance. It's still about us. I need to feel important, so therefore I'm going to be the one that's going to fix your problem for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Please help validate my competency.
Yes.
I think definitely kind of going back a little bit to the storytelling, the biggest thing for me is whenever we tell stories, whenever we relate, is it sometimes helpful? Sure. Like sometimes I think it helps to validate the client's feelings sometimes. But we start to travel very dangerously in that transference, counter transference lane of are we helping them, or are we trying to make them our therapist? Which is awful, especially if you work with children, because you don't want to put that burden on a young adult, a child's shoulders, which actually kind of goes to working with kids. I think that is it is tough whenever you're a helper, you're a fixer, and you want to make things better. Because I have had a handful of situations where I am trying. He's smirking because I've kind of told him sometimes whenever it happens, this is the third, fourth, fifth time somebody has come to me with the same situation. And then I'm finally like, do you not see this? Stay away from that boy. What do I have to do to tell you? Stay away from that boy. We've gone 5 sessions where I would come home, tell Lee, I just couldn't take it anymore. Like, this kid is about to have a nervous breakdown. If they don't stay away from this boy, I can see it's all stemming from this boy. But I don't get how they can't see it. I know they really need to come to that conclusion on their own. And sometimes I wonder if some of the kids I work with, because of their age or because of their lack of support at home, if they're at the point where they have the emotional maturity to come to that conclusion without somebody just putting it in black and white. Like even trying to coax them with, the last time you were in here, when you were crying, when you were upset, what was it that brought you in here? And they'll tell me. Do you see a pattern? I guess. So I don't know. I feel like that one tugs on me strongly, because I do agree we can't be fixers. That's not our place. We have to let people come to their own conclusions. And of course, that's a very narrow example. But sometimes sometimes I struggle with that immensely, especially with my little teenage hormones that come into my office.
I lost y'all for a while because my internet, I had to switch. It was being weird. So I might be circling back to something you've already talked about. But Lee, you mentioned confidentiality, and I think that's another way to create a safe space for them to know and understand that it's not going anywhere, that literally anything that they say or do is just in this room and that's it. I think as far as telling your story, I think it always depends. I think there's some people who that's the only way they understand that they're not alone. And it's not like the story isn't being told from a place of I have to compare traumas, but more of like there's hope on the other side, or that you're not the only one who experience. Because sometimes they say something and then they reel back and you can tell they're embarrassed that they said it. It's like, well, hang on, like let me just. It feels like sharing this would be important. And then there's been other times where I had no intention of telling a story, and then it drops in this experience that I had that I'm supposed to say, so I do, and then it unlocks something in them, and they feel safe and secure to say something. So I think it always depends. But if you're listening with an engagement to like, because I used to do that same thing. Oh, that I have to tell this story. I have to remember to tell this story. It's like, well, if the moment passes and there's no longer a reason to tell the story, why do I have to tell that story? There's no purpose behind that other than I told myself and my ego got attached to it. And now I'm going to follow through with it when we've already moved on and it doesn't matter. So I think there are times where sharing our experiences make it a safer space. And also it makes it feel more like, okay, well, I just told this horrific thing and now I'm afraid she's going to say something else. Whereas if I have something that is also horrific, they know that like, well, now we both have dirt on each other. Like that's a weird human like experience that is just how we tick, where it's another way to create a safe space. But I think the intention behind it and the purpose behind it always matters. And I've been in too many rooms where it's a bunch of people at the front telling how terrible their life was. and then, I don't know, where it's just like, well, what was the point? I don't know what the point was there other than, did you want the room to feel sorry for you? Are you in victimhood? Like, where are we going with this? Like, if you're telling a story from, healed, that's a very different thing than telling a story still in victimhood and going down the pity party, woe is me dance with people. It's like, that's not a uplifting, that's a comparison fixing thing. The fixing thing is a super important point too, Alina, and then I'll be quiet. But we did
Please
that.
don't be quiet. Do not be quiet, please.
We did that in the summit because every single time we do healthy boundaries, Dan comes in and we do healthy boundaries, and it gets, in order for us to go anywhere and give people time to chew on things and go deeper, there has to be awkward silence. There has to be. Or you don't stay anywhere, you don't go anywhere, you stay at that surface. And so before Dan got there, this time I was like, I just want to have a quick conversation with y'all because I want to talk about our tendency to fix and to fill space. I'm like, Dan's going to come in, we're going to do healthy boundaries, and there's going to be a lot of awkward silences. And I want us to really challenge ourselves, if you're open to it, to sit in that awkward silence. And you might have a million things in your head rattling off that you think will fix the situation. But 9 times out of 10, the situation we're talking about isn't actually where we need to get to. So I'm asking you, like, we're not here to fix anything. We're here to hold space. We're here to listen, and we're here to deep dive. And let's just see where that takes us. And it was amazing. It was the first summit where there was only like one moment where we all, meaning somebody opened a door and everybody glommed on to fix something, right? And I was like, hang on, I had a point I was going to make, but I needed that pause first. We're getting off track. Let's go back in. And then everyone was like, oh my God, that was surface level we were avoiding. And you're like, holy shit. It was like amazing. It was so cool. But like, I had to have that conversation first. Otherwise people just fill that space. I don't want to go where we actually have to go. Like, it's not about the fact that your son is acting out. This is about you. That's it. But we can't get there if we're trying to fix your son.
Oh, just
So that's the second time something like that's popped up, and that it's separating the person from the problem. So you just spoke to a whole lot of things that made me want to pull on a whole lot of different threads. And expectations, I think speaking to those expectations very, very early is one of the most powerful things we can do. This is what you can expect in this environment, and set the environment up to be exactly what you need it to be in that way. Like there will be room for silence, because that's when the really, really deep thinking happens, and you don't need to feel it. You don't you don't need to feel it. It's English. I'll get there. So uh then that's such a huge piece. So I'm curious, as you set that environment up with your clients or whoever you're working with in the very beginning, what's some of that conversation?
Well, I post my confidentiality, my ethics, on the front door of my office. Um, so that everybody who comes in my office has a grasp of, everything you say in here will be confidential. Then a lot of the conversation that comes up afterwards is more as needed, but in my case it's a little bit unique. So if I were trying to get a coaching client, then I feel like I would have that conversation, in an initial meeting. When I have kids come into my office, I never necessarily know what they're coming into my office for in that moment. It could be as mundane as, hey, I'm really struggling in this class and I need some pointers, right? Which doesn't necessarily require a full bodied confidentiality spiel, right? Or I get, unfortunately, the more serious abuse not allegations, but I need to talk to you about this type of abuse that's happening, or I want to kill myself. The deeper conversations I always revisit. When it's clear that that's the conversation that we're going to be having, we're going to revisit, because I need you to know this is not something that we can keep to ourselves. And I feel like, from what I've seen, that's a big difference between what I do and coaching. In coaching, it sounds like for a lot of people who are doing it, or I'm not saying they never have those conversations of a client saying, I really want to kill myself. But I definitely, unfortunately, have them sometimes on a weekly basis. There have been times where I've done suicide risk assessments multiple times in the same day. So I definitely, from what I see from Lee and from what I've heard from doing the CTI course that I did, it doesn't sound like it comes up quite as often in a one-to-one coaching session. And those are the times that I find it's most important. Hey, this is something that is going to leave the boundaries of this room. This is something that is going to come out of here, because we have to get you help.
I think that's a beautiful way to approach it. I had that when I taught preschool. Like the kids would be having a meltdown and they would want to talk. And I'd say, look, it's a safe space. Like, there's some things that if you tell me, we might, but I will let you know if that's going to be a thing and you will be a part of that. I mean, you might not get to make a decision in it, but I was always really clear about that, right? Like there are some things where I have to talk to somebody else, but I will let you know when and if that's going to happen. And for right now, I just want to hear what you have to say. And I'm here to help you. I'm not here for anything other than that. And it's amazing even preschoolers understand that, but like sometimes just to be clear, like, okay, so this is going to go outside this room. And like you said, it's here, it's because we need to get you help. And I'm not the person who can help that. Like I have had people come in and say, like, they don't say it like directly, but there's an underlying tone of like, that's it, I'm done with this life, whatever. And it's like, all right, well, hang on. I'm not a therapist and I'm not a person who's an expert in that field. So if that's really where you're at, then we need to go somewhere else and get you help, because I'm going to end this right now because I'm not your person yet. I might be later, but right now that's not me. I'm not it. And it's like amazing. Then usually it's a continued conversation and it takes them somewhere else, and we still get resources and support and all that other stuff. So
But it's even funny because uh, I've actually had colleagues try and call me out on that because they disagree with that thought process, because there have been times where I've had students who were hinting around and alluding to the fact that they may be suicidal, and I'll tell them then and
she froze.
She froze dead.
She froze did for me.
Rose. Oh,
You would think a school would have better internet.
I think so, right?
You would think so. Welcome to freaking Louisiana.
Hmm.
All the money goes to the politicians' pockets, not to the school.
Hmm.
Uh,
Oh,
cool.
see, let's see if we can, no,
We'll just pick
there's
it
a
up.
lot
And,
that, that Tanya's talking about and Michelle's talking about, much of what applies to, I mean, children, humans are still humans. It's just in coaching, we deal with older humans. But I think on the confidentiality, absolutely. And that's something that I include in, my contract. It's something that I talk about in that container setting. I think that's what we were talking about. So when you're setting that container, you're setting expectations of what is this going to feel like? One of the things is space, right? Space to sit with something that was just said or felt in the body is very uncomfortable for most people much of the time. That is why many industries around us exist, because they distract and make it easier to deflect, right, attention away from something that feels really uncomfortable. So if one does not feel comfortable to look at something, at a truth, at a realization, and explore it, there is no shortage of where they can go and what they can do to distract themselves, right? And so that space can feel very uncomfortable. So that is something that I do talk about with clients in the beginning. Actually, we talk about two sides of it. One is there will be space. There will be space to, at the end of your sentence, and I've had clients actually like squirm physically in their chair because they're uncomfortable with a pause. And then we would explore what that's like for them and what's happening there for them in that silence. And the other side that we talk about in safety is I will interject. There will be times that I will interject and interrupt. For example, if it is the client telling a story, and then there I am exercising some discernment, some judgment, and I sense that I'm wondering if, like, is this story serving the purpose of what this person's saying is what's important to them, what's their agenda, or are they going off, like off-roading on a trajectory, either because they got distracted or because it's much more comfortable to tell a story sometimes than turn attention back and shine the light on a boo-boo, right? On something uncertain. So I reserve the right to interject and interrupt as well. So there will be awkward. It doesn't need to be. There'll be silences that they're not used to give them space to make sure that, did you finish that sentence? Was there another thought forming? Was there something floating that you want to give space to, right? You want to give airtime to. And oftentimes that serves. And then when I see you kind of full of shit or lying to yourself or contradicting or a pattern that seems questionable, I will call it out. And if I need to call you out, I will use that judgment. And if you're not comfortable with that, I want you to tell me, right? I want you to call me out as well. That's part of the agreement that I have with clients. is like, you're going to not live in discomfort if you think something isn't serving you, doesn't work for you, you're going to call it out. I have no attachment to a solution, to an idea. I think that's another one, right? That's another one, is detachment from outcome, detachment from, like, if I throw an idea out or a question out, if that doesn't land, if it doesn't stick, I'm not going to be committed to trying to make it stick. I am neutral and frankly, I'm impartial to, like, you don't like that sweater? Fine. We have 85 more sweaters. We're in a sweater store.
So almost kind of feel like we're beating a dead horse at this particular moment. And I'm curious, like, if we can just take and shift it just a little bit into what's available in our lives in general to everybody that we come across if we are creating a safe space.
Say that one more time.
What is available in our lives if we are continuing to create safe spaces across the board with everybody that we meet, not just clientele, but like if our listeners are starting to do some of these things that we're talking about and they create that safe space for others in their life. They're not counselors, they're not coaches. How does this apply to them in their life?
I
Yeah.
think just leading by example, being open constantly, it has to be a habit.
Say more.
So I can't walk out and I can't show up as a closed off person if I want people to open up to me. It just doesn't work. I can't be constantly angry or frustrated or unaccepting, unloving. I can't be that person. I can't be that persona and expect people to have any sort of level of comfort with me.
I think for me, boundaries come from me first, which is what you were talking about a little bit, Tanya, or at least that's how it sounded to me, is like, I'm going to be mindful about how I show up and how I choose to engage and interact. And then that has a ripple effect out into the world. And I think those boundaries shift and ebb and flow based on the room we're in. Some rooms I'm in, I don't want everybody to come open up to me. Right. Like, but that doesn't mean I have to go in angry or frustrated or blocked. It just means that I get to use my words and set a boundary. You know what I mean? But I
I
think,
do. I like framing it that way as a boundary.
yeah. And I think the piece for me that shifted a lot, because I definitely, before I started really deep diving into my own work, I showed up as a fixer and as an enabler and as a human who was like, the people who came to me were people who didn't want to do their own work. They just wanted somebody to give them a magic pill and fix it. And I got out of my pain that way and they got out of theirs. But really, we weren't getting out of anything. We were in it. So I think to Lee's point, the question was like, what's available is a complete 180 on some level of who you engage with and how, when you just choose to show up like mindfully safe within yourself and then boundaried and respectful, I guess is the word that came in there, with other humans. Like if I know I'm in a crappy mood, well, then I need to choose where I go and how I engage with people or not in those moments.
Oh, I think when practicing creating safe space in everyday life, it's transformative. It changes how much of a person we get to know. It changes in the working world, it completely transforms a relationship where you can actually find solutions that you wouldn't have possibly been able to find if those defenses were up and people weren't contracted. So when you create that space, you're creating trust, you're creating room for curiosity, for openness. I think with children at home as parents, you create a connection where that's a deepened relationship with family, with loved ones. It translates across the board. And when you have that, you can find solutions, just like in the corporate world or in the working world. You come home and family squabbles or family arguments and people storming out and walking away, that can look completely different because people actually might start to see each other, not just stick to their script and stick to their agenda and their beliefs and their thoughts and their stories and their versions. They might actually start hearing what the other person is saying and start hearing their perspective and get a sense of their world. And then that creates space for compassion. So, wherever that safe space is created, it transforms that relationship completely. And it gives access to what would have never been available without it.
So I'm trying to describe this in like real life terms, and I'm getting visions of like the husband who tells his wife, "Look here, let me tell you how things are going to be." And then she quietly resents and sits there fuming, and there's always this passive aggressive behavior that pops out and
Sure.
just leads to just a closed off relationship. And the eventually one of these days it just blows up because that resentment can only build for so long. Versus an open relationship where we create that safe space for other people to be heard and seen and accepted as they are. And how that, like, even in Tanya and I's relationship, whenever I was going through my roughest moments, it's like, what do you want? She said, oh, she would just constantly say, I just want you to be happy. Very rarely would she try and put her own agenda on me. It's like, I want you to be happy. I want you to live your life. And how much that, me having that, was the thing that created my want to be a better and more well-rounded person. That's phenomenal what opened up in me to receive that kind of love and that kind of safety and that kind of space. It's just so that's what's available. And I think about children. If we look at our relationship with children, and I need you to be the basketball player, I need you to be the baseball player, I need you to be the soccer player, I need you to be the businessman who come in, and you're going to come in and you're going to take over my business because this is a family business and this is what you have to do. And how much resentment that builds up, and because people aren't allowed to have that safe space to be themselves. And how those relationships more than likely will dissolve, or they stay very, very surface level. Tanya and I, whenever we're with our children, we hear on a regular basis, I love you. You're amazing. All the time. It's absolutely awesome, the relationship we have with our children, because of the safe space that we open up for them. They are 100% okay to go and be themselves and explore the world, and we let them go screw things up, and so they can learn from it. Because if they screw up now, they learn how to take care of it themselves. When they go out and they become an adult, they already have that sense of personal agency and that sense of personal authority. They become better adults, you know? So,
Well, and to that point, I think that it was not too long ago, I couldn't tell you the situation. I had asked one of the kids, I think it was the obstinate one, to share something with me, and reluctantly she did. And I said, was that uncomfortable for you? And she said, yes. And I, that kind of hurt my helper heart a little, because I was like, I really want you to be able to be comfortable telling me these things. I want you to feel safe telling me these things. But at the same time, you know what? I had to drag that particular conversation out of her. And it was something she needed to tell me. But maybe she can admit that she didn't quite feel her safest telling me that, but she felt safe enough to tell me, yeah, that was uncomfortable. So I still consider that a win.
Well, and it's also possible that the uncomfortable part had nothing to do with you. It was speaking the words themselves was the uncomfortable piece. You know, it wouldn't have mattered who she was talking to. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's an
And
excellent point.
think, yeah, I think, Lee said those were what he was envisioning with all this conversation. I think my vision with what everybody has been adding to the conversation is even a little simpler, because you know what I keep thinking, Michelle, as you're talking, Alina, as you're talking, I keep thinking of bringing a cart full of groceries to a cashier. How many times have we done that where they are just pissed the fuck off? They are, or maybe we witnessed the person before us in line just being a jackass to them for what looks like no reason or reasons out of their control. And then just having a nice conversation like, hey, how are you doing today? Or just a little bit of communication and treating them like a human being. How many times has one of us probably done that? And you see them do a complete 180. They went from the body language, the sagging shoulders, the grumpy face, to almost like a weight has been lifted off of them. Just because one person treated them like a human being. That's kind of what I see when everybody's saying, creating your boundaries or showing, showing up like you want to show up whenever we're there for our clients, just in everyday life, just basic interactions with everyday people.
Care
Like
to apply
grocery
it to
store.
the corporate world there, Alina?
I mean, isn't that the most basic universal need, to be seen, heard, understood, acknowledged? I am here. I matter. And that applies across the board in the grocery store, in the corporate world. Absolutely. That's the transformation. That's the difference between someone who is just sitting there passionless and checking check boxes and ready to go, ready to quit, doesn't care. No investment personally, what happens? No investment personally, what happens if a team member is in trouble or overworked? Because you're just sort of go inward. When people don't feel seen and heard, they contract and they become smaller, and they don't have the bandwidth to stand up and look around and see others and consider others. And I think that what Tanya's talking about is this beautiful chain reaction. When you are that person in the grocery store in line, and that jackass did go in front of you, and you just saw that interaction, and you show that person some empathy, and you see them, and they open up and they become a little brighter, and they might pay it forward, right? To that might spill over to the next person behind you in line in that grocery store, and they might be a little bit friendlier. And then maybe that next jackass that's going to be unkind and short with them, they might be a little bit less affected by them because they might have that perspective. Yeah, you know what? Maybe someone else was a jackass to them, and then they're, let it go.
You have a lot of experience watching this happen with managers and their teams. Like, whenever you see a manager that is creating safe space for their employees, how does that change the workplace?
It's a total transformation. It's the difference between people holding back and siloing. It's the difference between a project being done well, like on time and well, right? And making sure that the right people are at the table, making sure that people feel safe to speak up if they see something going off tracks, if they think something's not a good idea. That personal investment, that's the difference between a team being engaged and caring and doing great work and thinking ahead and thinking beyond, like, well, what's the competition doing? Critical thinking needs safety, needs space for critical thinking to come out. And if we don't have critical thinking, we're following instructions mindlessly. That's a key differentiation, right, in the safe space that's created.
I think that's such a great point about, like, you basically what I heard there was you need the pause to get to the critical thinking. And when Tanya was talking about the grocery store example, that's such a great example because I keep hearing two words. Like, if the listeners are looking for just things they can do to notice and help them show up in a new and different way, I hear compassion and either witness or observer. You have to pause to observe. And if you're observing without yourself in the way, like, you wouldn't have noticed that the person in front was mad and taken it to the compassionate level of the clerk, of the person ringing you up, if you hadn't paused and witnessed it without being triggered within your own wounds or your own stuff or your own day that's already frustrating perhaps. So it's like, can you just like witness the world around you and perhaps ponder it from a different perspective other than it being about you? I think that's such an important piece. And that's how we can get to compassion. Because if somebody's angry in a line in front of me, my guttural reaction is anger myself. Oh, why are they being such a dick? Oh, that poor clerk. And just judgment, and my own anger. Whereas if I pause and be like, gosh, I wonder what they're so mad about. Maybe they're having a crappy day. Ooh, it would be really hard to be the person on the other side of that anger. That sucks for them. Maybe not. Maybe they're okay with it. And then to just decide, how do I want to show up within that whole experience? Do I need to be involved at all? Maybe not. But even if I just meet that person ringing me up with an ounce of more compassion, does that change their day? And like you said, Alina, get them to a greater capacity for whatever bullshit comes the rest of their day. Like, just one person and their kindness can impact a day on an exponential level. I've experienced it. I'm sure we all have, and maybe you haven't, but it just feels like taking that pause so you can have a critical thought as opposed to it just being reactionary. Like those reactions, where do they take you? They're not mindful. They don't have critical thought behind them. They don't have a whole lot of compassion behind them. But that's a muscle that we have to build. That's like a strength that we have to, a new pattern, a new habit that we get to explore and choose in our own way. And maybe it looks different for you. Maybe it's not compassion and observer. Maybe it's, gosh, I want to think about this for a minute and I would like to not be angry too. And that's the only decisions you come to. But that changes something because it takes you out of a pattern of how you normally show up in uncomfortable situations.
I'm thinking about like a quick tip of a person who wants to try something new on. Say, all right, let me try it. What's that first baby step? And I think about what you just said, Michelle. Pause. Right? Pause, take a breath. Pause, take a breath. And see the person. Look at them. There's a human in front of you. That's the pause, the acknowledgement.
And get curious what's going on in their world. I absolutely love that you brought critical thinking into it, because my mind was going towards creativity right before you said that, and really what we're talking about here is leaving a space open to make a difference in the nervous system. We are changing things from the amygdala-driven lizard brain survival mode to, let's actually turn on our prefrontal cortex. Let's think critically. Let's be creative. Let's create an environment to where people can actually show up as their best selves, not the reactive lizard brain monkey self. A safe space allows for humans to be humans and not just be animal reactive. 100%. It's allowing the parasympathetic nervous system. Look, it's English. I'll get it, damn it. Allowing that parasympathetic nervous system to have a little bit of say so rather than always being sympathetic activated, that fight or flight, that freeze, the fawn or that response, whatever it is, allowing that fawn response or the whatever to relax and for people to show up truly heard, truly seen, and accepted as they are.
Mhm.
That's such a key piece. I think like we get to have a bad day. We get to be angry every now and again and to have compassion for that and to not be judged for it. Now, you see somebody crapping all over somebody else, that's a different story, maybe, right? Like your crappy day doesn't have to impact the rest of the world. But I love that, your point about accept it as you are.
And if we're personally strong enough to be able to create that safe space, now we are the ones that can take that whatever somebody needs to vent and allow them to vent it.
Yeah. And recognize that it's not about you.
Mm-hmm.
It's theirs. It's not yours. It doesn't have to be yours. Don't make it yours.
Yeah.
But that
So I
safe
have
vessel
to,
holds that space and dissipates it.
I have to bring up because Michelle, like you and Lee created this perfect segue to one of my favorite children's books to read to our children is called Grumpy Monkey. And it's essentially exactly what you just described. It's about the grumpy monkey Jim kind of recognizing throughout the story that he is having a bad day, though he wants to deny it at first, and then just kind of realizing it's okay to have a bad day, and tomorrow will probably be better.
And you don't have to take it out on other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I do think like I mean, maybe we're getting off on a tangent. We don't have to go there, but like I'm thinking about Grumpy Monkey and preschoolers. I used to teach preschool, right? Like you can have a room that's vibed up and having fun, and you put one grumpy monkey in that room, and suddenly they're all fighting and everybody's grumpy. But it's
Oh yeah.
because like they take it personally and take offense to the fact that they're grumpy, and then it just builds on this energy. Whereas if I mean, preschoolers don't have necessarily the emotional intelligence or the capacity to do this, but to just pause and be like, gosh, you're having a bad day. Do you need anything? Can I help you? Or do you want me to just leave you alone? Because I swear, when there's a grumpy monkey in the room, everybody goes up and pushes all the grumpy monkey's buttons. It's like they're just
Uh-huh.
amplifying everything, which is, I mean, if you think about that as adults, we do it too. We just do it in very different, clever ways and we don't realize it. It's like
The
just
same
pushing all the buttons of the
thing.
grumpy monkeys.
It's the same show, like 17 seasons later.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And I love what we're talking about, what Lee was talking about earlier with the different parts of the brain, right? Like our brain is wired to prefer that monkey brain part of us, the survival part, right? The part that lets us live and not, be killed by the saber-toothed tiger. And it does take many, many repetitions, and habit formation is key to creating a safe space for people. It doesn't happen. It isn't for many, a natural response. It's something that we condition ourselves and consciously build a habit of doing, of creating that space. Because we're wired to not do that. We are wired to look at the negative, to pounce, to assume, to judge. Those are our survival instincts that are needed, and they're there to protect us. And sometimes they're critical, right? But we're talking about situations where there is discernment, there's room for us to create that space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's habit formation.
I noticed earlier when Michelle was talking about creating that safe space for the preschoolers and how normally they're more likely to relax and calm down and take use of that safe space. And as adults, we're so aware of being taken advantage of and led in different directions in covert ways that we are always on guard for, the subtle manipulations or the subtle judgment that happens in the subcontext of adult conversations. So not what feels like a safe space many times has been taken advantage of over the years. So we'll become jaded, and that, or even if we do create that safe space, it won't be utilized because the other person may still be on guard. Right. So I'm curious if y'all have any kind of thoughts on allowing that to be, circumventing it, speeding up that trust process to create a safe space amongst adults.
I think what you're talking about with adults, I guess that difference between children versus adults and resting in that safe space is that years later, adults have stories and firsthand experiences that children may not yet have, or may not yet have as many, to reinforce certain ideas of when X happens, Y behavior will keep me safe. And maybe that was reinforced for adults many, many times. And so that's a story. It's like there are neural pathways that are created and stories that are reinforced to hold on to. And so people hold on to old stories that may or may not apply in the current situations, that may or may not be serving them in the current situations. So one of the things that one can do when they're creating that safe space is that self-management, is that active listening, that compassion and curiosity, managing ourselves and making sure that we're bringing ourselves in the way that is going to be helpful. That's the first thing.
I think that's part of it. That's a big part of it. I also think if we're talking about, adults who maybe have been burned before by thinking they can trust somebody and, for whatever reason they can't, I think it does circle back to kind of Michelle's point in showing through boundaries and just that leading by example and showing up as someone who is being open, like Alina said, but also if somebody's been burned before, it's 100% just going to take time, because we can say all we want. This is a safe space. We can say all we want. This is confidential. I think one thing, especially for the students I've worked with, is whenever we are very open with, hey, you touched on XYZ, and I think I know somebody who has experience with that. Would you mind if I share that with them in order to better help you? And that, even if they don't consciously realize it, that's one way they can think, okay, she said she's not going to share anything that's said in this office with anyone else. And she's telling me that she would like to share. More than likely, if I'm saying I can help you because I know this person who has experience with it, they're going to say yes. I don't think I've ever had a situation where I wanted to bring in another person where someone told me absolutely not. But I think just being open about, I do want to share this, lets them know, okay, I really don't think she's going to share it if I tell her I don't want her to share it. Am I making sense? I know I'm being vague, but
I'm hearing ask permission. That's
well,
what I just
sure.
heard. Like, make sure that we're asking permission to whatever it is that's going on in the moment.
Yes, but I think that's an oversimplification of what I'm trying to get at. I'm saying not just ask permission, like, because, we're going to ask permission for other things. Like, hey, can I have your permission to call you out on this? That's not what I'm talking about in asking permission. I'm talking about specifically, I'm telling you, there's confidentiality here. I'm telling you that what you're saying to me will not leave this room, but now I'm asking you, can it? And I think showing them that a true example of, I am not going to let this leave the room unless you think it will help you. I think that's one little stepping stone to building trust.
The reinforcing trust,
Yes.
letting the person see that they have agency.
Yes. I like the agency term. Absolutely.
Like, you get to decide. You're not helpless here.
And letting them know, if this is not okay, fine. We'll work with what we got, and we'll make this work another way. I think it's the minute things like that typically happen eventually in conversations that we're having with our clients, that are the tiny little stepping stones that lead to building trust. Those are the tiny little stepping stones that get us to the other side of the river, where true trust is a foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's, in the beginning, I told you that this is how it's going to be, that I set expectations. And now I'm showing to you that I mean it. I'm demonstrating to you over and over that what we talked about is actually true. And I will keep my word. There is integrity here.
I love the idea of the trust bank account. Like, trust is slowly built up via small deposits, one little piece at a time, one little paycheck at a time. And just like normal paychecks, these paychecks are absolutely teeny small. And it's really easy to empty that whole account in one fell swoop. To completely bankrupt that trust account takes one action, and then it's gone. Now you're starting from the negative again. And the deposits, for some reason, the deposits can only be exceptionally small.
And I think that's the biggest point, though. If we're working with somebody who doesn't know us and they have trust issues, then
which is most people.
Right. I mean, there are some
Pick
people
me.
who are there are some people who are open, and if you say confidentiality, great confidentiality. But most people are going to be more closed off. And in my opinion, the only thing we can do is add those little stepping stones, and in the appropriate moments, so that they can get to the other side of the river, so they can really see the foundation. I don't think there's any other way to do it, because it, like, going back to the original question of, what can we do to incorporate to build that trust, like, immediately? We can't. It has to be the small deposits.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Michelle.
No, go ahead.
Oh no, that's what I was just saying. I think it has to be the small deposits in the bank account for most people. And then once you have enough deposits, the trust is just going to start building more and more. The more money you have in the bank, the bigger your interest is going to be.
I think it's relative. What's small to a small deposit to one person may be experienced as a huge deposit to another. So I think for me, the balance, when we're looking at like the debits and the credits in the account, in the trust account, it can take one, no matter what. It could take one action to undermine 10 previous actions.
And if you want to take it out of the financial bucket, you can think of it as water. It's drops in a bucket, one drop at a time in a bucket, but you can punch holes in that bucket pretty quickly, or spill the whole damn thing just in one little action. I think it not even, it depends, but it's a smidgy different whether you're working with someone one-on-one or if you're in a group. I think the group trust is layered. it can be equally helpful to have other people in the room, but also a little more complicated to maintain that safe container because people are looking at you as the leader. If someone goes outside of any boundary, like how are you going to reel that back in? How are we going to address that? How are you going to keep this vessel sacred and safe? That can be tricky to navigate. But I think whether it's an individual or a group, it comes back to much of what you guys are saying. It's like consistency, but also like be Captain Obvious. Like when I have summits, I literally start with like, first, I want to celebrate you for choosing yourself and putting your butt in this seat. I know there's going to be challenges this weekend. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have that expectation, but I'm going to make it clear that you will be challenged and also know that you are the one who gets to make the choice to lean into this group and this community. So figure out who you resonate with and ask for help when you need it, because that's what you're here for. And all of those different things, and I also acknowledge like, night one, it's normal. I suspect many of you are feeling terrified right now because you just opened a can of worms that perhaps you haven't opened before. And I just want you to know that it's a safe space. It is a container to be held in, but you're the one that has to choose to be held. Like you can choose to run. And if you do, there's nothing we can do about that. But I really, I encourage you and I promise you that if you choose to stay, we will dive in together. You will get support. You will be held. And you'll find new tools. But I'm also going to promise you, like I'm going to manage those expectations. You're going to be challenged. There will be hard things. You will want to run away. And I'm going to encourage you when that happens to let it be known so that we know where you're at, so we can hold the space and we can maybe do nothing, but we can sit in it with you. And that in and of itself is a support and builds a strength that we don't often have in the external world. Like we're in a sacred container right now where we get things in new and different ways because we can. And that's huge. And I make it clear right out of the gate, this is a sacred circle, which means anything that's said in here stays in here. Outside of anything I say, I'll tell you if I'm okay with it leaving the room or not. But everything else that everyone else says, they get to tell you things that they feel horrible about. And they will. It happens every time. And we get to sit in non-judgment. We get to sit in love and compassion and understand we all have our own shit and our own wounds and we're doing the best we can. And that's all we got. But I think those Captain Obvious things, like it's human and it makes people feel like, oh, holy shit. Like the people in this room are doing the work. We do get this. And then to have people in the room who've been there before, who will get vulnerable really quickly, just like take their clothes off in the middle of the room, figuratively, not for realsies, and just like stand in front of the room naked going, yep, this is all my shit. Here we are. Now what? And that opens a door in a way that builds and empowers the newbies in the room to understand like, oh, she wasn't kidding. It is a safe space. She just said something that I would never say in front of another human. And look, nobody even flinched. There was no judgment in this room. We were just like, yep, been there, done that. I mean, not in the exact same way, but now what? What do we want to do different? So good.
It's so good. And I when I listen to you talk about this, how you speak to the folks at your summit, I think about intentionality, right? Being very clear on the intention. And, it's obvious to some, like you're talking about Captain Obvious, but it may not at all be obvious to the person in the audience, right? Or it might be in the back of their mind, or maybe a little bit. So aligning on those intentions of what you wish for the space to serve as is key. I think that's another, if I'm thinking about someone who's listening, who's like, I want to give this a try. I think that's the second thing I would say. One is take a breath, right?
Yeah.
Take a breath. And two, think about your intention, be clear, and then share it.
And if the relationship is strong enough, has built enough that sharing those vulnerabilities and being willing to go first opens that door right up.
Yeah.
So I feel like leaving us with a story that happened just this weekend that's a really, really great example of what's available whenever you create a safe space for people. And I'm going to go ahead.
Oh, you have to tell a story, huh?
Is that the best you got?
I'm in. I
Hey.
want to hear the story.
Alina and Michelle liked it.
Is that the best you got?
I just think it's funny. You're
You want
talking
you
about
want to
how
you want to zing
I
some more
always
out
have
there?
to
Come on.
tell this story. Always have to tell this story. Hey,
Yep.
before we leave, let me tell this story.
Yeah, and then I was going to wrap up with I want to leave just a little bit more space for y'all to have your closing thoughts as well. But now you don't get that anymore because you already took that time.
Oh, I see. I see what's happening here. I see how this day is going to go.
I suspect this is foreplay for
You have
Tanya and
no-
Lee. That's my
You
hypothesis.
have no idea.
I did.
Okay, go ahead, dear.
So this weekend we're at a baby shower. I'm gonna withhold any kind of specific details to keep these people's identity, confidential. So Tanya was having a discussion with somebody that she's known for quite a while. They recently reconnected. Um, and she was going through a fairly difficult moment. And in this baby shower, Tanya just held that space for her to let it go. And, they're going through a custody battle and it's rough. It's a really, really rough custody battle because there's a lot of shit flying, for lack of a better term, right? And Tanya was just there and listened and was curious and allowed her to open up and just vent. And by the time I could see, I was watching from across the way, and I watched, like, at first, poor girl was like all hunched up on herself and just like anxious, and then by the time they were done, it was like somebody had poked a pin in her because she was just relaxed, and you could tell she was ready to go and reface this battle because she had somebody that's got her back. Somebody was there for her to just listen and say, yeah, we did too, because we had that same issue happen to us. So it's that me too, and it's gonna be okay kind of thought. It's unbelievably powerful to come from that kind of place for people and see what is available in this world when we create that safe space and allow people just to be seen and heard and accepted. I really don't. I don't think there's anything more valuable to a person on this planet than to be seen, heard, and accepted as they are.
Agree.
think creating a safe space is an act of love.
And for some people to receive that is really challenging. And to remember that creates an even safer space.
I think that's a really good point, Michelle, because I think Lee and I were both one of those people that were not able to receive that very well for many, many years. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful thing to be observant about.
I don't know what you talk about. I'm not ready to receive yet.
You guys,
Lies.
Humor is one of my coping
Lies.
mechanisms too.
I'm telling you, this is all just foreplay.
Oh yeah, he receives a lot.
Right on. Anything else to add?
Some of those marketing products, Alina, some of those marketing products you've been working on,
Yeah.
he receives.
Are we talking about dildos?
Lee, Mr. Smart, what kind of language is this?
I
You're
know.
3 ladies. I'm gonna have to say an extra prayer for you.
Oh, that sounds like a whole lot of judgment.
Oh man.
We just
Stay
popped
smart, you better get
our
right.
sacred vessel.
I'm like, I will have none of it.
You best get right, Lee Smart, before you get left.
Oh, here we go.
It's so
Oh,
good. Thank you for bringing that one back up. I heard it a bunch of times. Abigail was saying it for weeks
mhm.
after
It has
Leonardo
not
left.
gotten old. It
It's
really has
good.
not gotten old.
It's good. It's good. It's exotic to me and to Abigail.
You know what's really funny is I used it yesterday, and the person I was talking to accepted it as like I really meant it. So that you got to be careful where you use that one.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's a really good point. Because if I said it here with people near me, they're like, "What? What are you talking about?" Like, huh? Right, left. What are you talking? Politics? Be like, what?
You just said that's a really good point.
Because it is a really good point. Thanks, Michelle.
I just had to point out the really good point.
I appreciate you pointing out.
Is this foreplay?
You tell me, Tanya. Do you want
From
it
the
to
big
be?
apple to the little apple, let's go.
What do you want it to be, Tanya?
Oh,
Are we talking
man.
about fantasies now?
Reality, fantasy. You know, it's a joke.
Hey, thank y'all so much for allowing me to join today.
Mhm.
I really
Lovely to have
appreciate
you.
it.
It's so nice.
I love it when you're here.
I know.
This has been a very pointed conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I like you.
Oh, I like you too. No,
Not
I
afraid to
really,
say it. Yeah, no, it's so it's
Is
lovely.
this foreplay?
all,
Because
all,
I am down.
Who said anything about you? What does this
yeah,
do with you?
this is a girl party.
I know. What are you? This is really, truly like.
No, I really have felt, I don't know, Alina, Michelle, y'all have been such insights into y'all's each of y'all's worlds of coaching. I just love hearing what both of you have to say. I know that y'all offer so much to so many different people, and you know, I'm hopeful that I will be able to continue joining y'all in some capacity at times, because y'all are both so, y'all mean a lot to me, and I love hearing what you have to say. You're pretty cool too, Lee.
Oh, received.
That's mutual.
It's so
Received
yes,
and reciprocated.
yes, right back.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely, if I took a few notes because there's some stuff I want to add to my article now after we've had this conversation. But if y'all would like to read it, to offer any advice, to make any, points, I would love
Yes.
to share with you too.
Share,
I would love
please.
to read it.
Yes.
I'll see about trying to send it. So cool. All right. Well,
See about trying to send it. What do you mean you're going to see about it?
I think you're just going to do it. I'm pretty sure.
Is that the way that you say it?
I know
there,
you can
or
find
did
a
you?
way.
Does that mean the same thing as I'm going to send it?
is there a lack of trust here?
It's like I'm going to see about it.
No, there's a
Like,
lack of clarity in your communication.
or I don't know if it's like a regional thing. If it's like I'm going to see about it. Is that synonymous as like you will be receiving?
I'm going to see to making it happen.
You're going to make sure it happens.
All right. I really do have to. It's time for me to get back to work.
To
So
work.
To help
Oh,
each
back to the real world.
Just
Love you.
change our
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
lives.
Love you too.
Oh, I like her a lot. I do. It's good stuff.
Shh, she can hear you. Thank you for listening to That's a Great Point with Alina Doran, Michelle Albers, and Lee Smart. To find out more about how we can serve you, check out our links in the show description. Thanks for playing along.